he previously has said this.
Hey, make this go viral, y'all, because I'm on some real shit right now. Just think, if y'all want the murder rate to go fucking down, why y'all on this make a fucking state for straight grave niggas, straight hitters, and let us just kill each other? Let us just go dumb, you heard me? And if the other ones kill outside of the state lines, the government get to kill them or kill y'all. Like, if the ones won't bang for the rest of our life.
You're about to hear something that doesn't sound like a headline. It sounds like real life breaking in real time. No filters, no PA, no script. Just emotion hitting the internet before anyone could control it. When NBA YoungBoy stayed completely silent after the shooting of NBA Ben 10, people started asking questions. But then his brother, Boy Youngie, went live, and everything changed. What he said wasn't polished. It wasn't safe, and it definitely wasn't meant for headlines. It was raw, emotional, and honestly uncomfortable to listen to. The kind of words that come out when someone you love is fighting for their life, and you don't know what happens next. But here's the part nobody is really breaking down. This wasn't just another incident. This wasn't just another rapper affiliate getting shot. The situation runs deeper. Family ties, loyalty, history, and a lifestyle that doesn't just disappear when success shows up. And when you really listen to what was said, line by line, it starts to sound less like a rant and more like a warning. Because what happened that night in Houston, that might only be the beginning. To really understand why that moment hit the way it did, you have to go back before the headlines, before the rumors, before social media started doing what it always does, turning real life into something fast, loud, and often wrong. Because NBA Ben 10 was never just some name floating around in the background. A lot of people online like to use the word affiliate because it creates distance. It makes things feel less personal, less real. Like someone is just loosely connected to a bigger name. But if you actually look at the history, if you actually pay attention to the people who've been around from the beginning, that label doesn't hold up. Ben 10 was part of the foundation. We're talking about someone who was there before the fame fully hit, before the tours, before the industry machine really started moving. Back when things weren't polished, when everything was still being built from the ground up. He wasn't added later. He didn't show up when it became beneficial. He was already there. That kind of history changes everything. And when you understand that, you start to see why this situation carries so much weight for NBA YoungBoy and everyone around him. This isn't business. This isn't industry politics. This is personal. There's been moments over the years where YoungBoy himself made it clear how deep that connection runs. Not in some interview crafted for headlines, but in the way he talked about responsibility, about family, about being there for the people closest to him no matter what happens. That kind of loyalty doesn't come from contracts. It comes from shared experiences, from growing up in the same environments, from surviving the same struggles. And Ben 10 wasn't just standing next to that success. He was building his own lane at the same time. He had his own following, his own presence online, the kind of audience that doesn't just show up overnight. That takes consistency. It takes understanding how to move in a space where attention is everything. Music, content, visuals, he was active. Not just appearing, but creating. And in today's world, that matters more than ever. Because now, being connected to someone famous isn't enough. People want identity. They want authenticity. And whether you agree with the lifestyle or not, that's something his audience saw in him. But outside of all of that, outside of the numbers and the visibility, there's another layer that doesn't get talked about enough. He's a father. And that changes the way situations like this land. Because now it's not just about what happened in that moment. It's about everything connected to that person. The people who depend on him. The people who are watching all of this unfold without any control over it. That's the part social media doesn't slow down for. It moves fast. Too fast. Because the night everything happened, the internet didn't wait for confirmation. It didn't wait for facts. It didn't wait for clarity. It reacted. And it reacted the way it usually does, by jumping straight to the worst possible conclusion. Well, let's take it back to that night. Houston late. The kind of setting where people go to relax, to step away from whatever chaos exists outside. Not the type of place where you expect things to escalate the way they did. And for a while, everything looked normal. There was no warning sign in the beginning. No obvious signal that anything was about to go wrong. Just another night, people moving, conversations happening, energy steady. Then something shifted. And from everything that's been put together so far, it didn't start as something random. It didn't come out of nowhere. It escalated quickly. What started as a confrontation turned into something physical. The kind of situation that can either end in seconds or spiral, depending on who's involved and how far things go. And in this case, it didn't stop. Because once it crossed that line, once it turned physical, everything after that happened fast. Too fast. A weapon gets introduced into a situation that didn't start with one in hand. And once that happens, the entire environment changes instantly. Now, it's not just about the people involved in the confrontation. It's about everyone in the room. Panic doesn't move in slow motion. It hits all at once. People trying to understand what's happening while also trying to get out of the way of it. Noise, confusion, movement, all overlapping in seconds that feel longer than they actually are. And in the middle of that, shots are fired. Multiple. Inside a space that wasn't built for that kind of chaos. And when it's over, when that moment passes as quickly as it started, what's left behind is the part nobody can undo. Injuries, fear, questions. And for NBA Ben 10, it was serious. The kind of serious that doesn't get fully understood until hours later, when the adrenaline is gone and reality starts to settle in. He was taken out of there fighting to stay alive. And while all of that is happening in real life, something else is happening at the exact same time online. Information starts spreading. Except it's not really information. It's guesses, assumptions, people repeating what they heard from someone else who didn't actually know either. And before anyone close to the situation even has a chance to speak, the narrative is already out of control. People saying he didn't make it. People posting things like it's confirmed. And that's the dangerous part about the speed of the internet. It doesn't pause for truth. It moves on momentum. So now you've got two realities happening at once. One inside the hospital, where doctors are working, where family members are trying to get answers, where every update matters. And another one online, where millions of people are watching, reacting, commenting, without actually knowing what's real yet. That gap between reality and perception, that's where things get messy. Because for the people directly connected, this isn't content. This isn't entertainment. This is someone they love, someone they've known for years, someone whose life just changed in a matter of seconds. And in the middle of all that, there's pressure. Pressure to respond. Pressure to say something. Pressure to control a narrative that's already spinning. But not everyone moves the same way in moments like that. Some people go quiet, like NBA YoungBoy, and others, they speak. Without filters, without waiting, without thinking about how it's going to be received. They just let it out. And that's exactly what Boy Youngie did. Not as a calculated move, not as a statement, but as a reaction, a real one. And whether people agreed with what he said or not, whether they understood it or not, one thing is clear. It came from a place that wasn't thinking about headlines. It came from a place that was still processing what just happened. And that's where this story really starts to shift. Because once those words hit the internet, once people started replaying them, analyzing them, debating them, this stopped being just about a shooting. It turned into something bigger. Something that goes beyond one night, one moment, one incident. And that's where things started to get complicated. Once that live stream hit the internet, everything changed. Not the situation itself, because what happened already happened, but the way people started to interpret it, the way the conversation shifted, the way the energy around it started building. Because now it wasn't just about NBA Ben 10 being in the hospital. Now it was about what comes next. And that question, that's what had everybody watching. When Boy Youngie spoke, it didn't sound like something meant to calm people down. It didn't sound like damage control. It didn't sound like someone trying to de-escalate anything. It sounded like emotion with no filter. The kind that shows up when you don't have time to think about consequences, when your mind is still stuck on what just happened, when anger and fear are sitting in the same place and neither one is backing down. And the internet picked up on that immediately. Some people heard pain. Others heard something else. Because when certain words are said publicly, especially in a moment like this. They don't just disappear after the live stream ends. They get clipped, reposted, slowed down, analyzed from every angle. And now everyone's trying to figure out what those words actually mean. Not just what was said, but what was intended. That's where things start to split. On one side, you've got people saying, this is a natural reaction, that anybody in that position, watching someone close to them fighting for their life, might say things they wouldn't normally say. That it's not about logic in that moment. It's about emotion. But on the other side, there are people looking at it differently. They're not just hearing emotion. They're hearing escalation. And that's where the tension starts building, not just in the situation itself, but in how it's being perceived by millions of people at the same time. Because perception matters now more than ever, especially when law enforcement is involved, especially when investigations are active, especially when every public statement can be picked apart and used in ways the person speaking might not have intended. And that brings everything back to NBA YoungBoy. Because while all of this is happening, while the clips are going viral, while debates are happening online, while people are trying to decode every word, he's not saying anything. No post, no caption, no reaction. And to people on the outside, that silence feels loud. It creates questions. Why hasn't he said anything? Does he not want to address it? Is he waiting? Is he being told not to speak? But if you look at the bigger picture, that silence might actually be the most calculated move in this entire situation. Because this isn't just someone reacting to bad news. This is someone who understands how quickly things can turn from words into consequences. Someone who has already experienced what happens when attention from the wrong places starts building. In today's environment, especially in situations connected to violence, words don't just stay online. They travel. They get reviewed. They get interpreted in ways that go beyond what the average person sees. So staying quiet? That's not always weakness. Sometimes it's awareness. And while that silence holds one kind of weight, Boy's words carry another. Because now you've got two different responses to the same situation. One public, one private, one emotional, one controlled. And together, they create a balance that people are trying to understand in real time. But there's another layer here that doesn't get enough attention. And that's how quickly a situation like this becomes bigger than the people directly involved. Because once it hits the internet at this level, it's no longer contained. Now it's part of a larger conversation. Fans start choosing sides, even when there aren't clear sides to choose. People start connecting it to past situations, past tensions, past rumors that may or may not have anything to do with what actually happened. And suddenly, the story starts expanding. Not because new facts are coming out, but because people are filling in gaps on their own. That's how narratives get built in real time. And once they start, they're hard to control. Because now, alongside the real investigation, the one happening with actual evidence, actual witnesses, there's a second investigation happening online. Except that one isn't based on facts. It's based on assumptions. And those assumptions spread fast. Names start getting mentioned. Connections start getting made. And even without confirmation, those names start sticking to the story. That's the reality of how information moves now. It doesn't wait. It doesn't verify first. It reacts. And once something gains enough attention, it becomes part of the conversation whether it's accurate or not. Meanwhile, in real life, the situation is still developing. NBA Ben 10 is still in recovery. Doctors are still evaluating. Family is still processing. And none of that moves at the same speed as the internet. Recovery isn't instant. Clarity isn't instant. But online, everything feels immediate. That disconnect is where things start to feel distorted. Because people watching from the outside start expecting updates, expecting responses, expecting closure on a timeline that doesn't match reality. And when they don't get it, they start creating their own versions of what must be happening. That's how pressure builds. Not just on the situation, but on the people inside it. Because now every move or lack of a move gets interpreted. Every silence gets questioned. Every word gets amplified. And in the middle of all that, there's still one question that hasn't been answered publicly. Who is responsible? That's the piece that keeps everything unsettled. Because without that answer, everything else feels incomplete. And until that answer comes, speculation fills the space. People think they know. People claim they heard something, but officially, nothing solid has been confirmed in a way that closes the situation. And that uncertainty, that's what keeps the tension alive. Because when something serious happens and there's no clear resolution, people don't just forget about it. They watch, they wait, they anticipate what might happen next. And that's where things start to shift from reaction to expectation. Because now it's not just about what happened. It's about what people think is going to happen. And whether that expectation is real or not, whether it's justified or not, it still influences how the entire situation is viewed. Especially when emotions are still high. Especially when the people involved have history, reputation, and visibility at a level where everything they do gets attention. That's when moments like this stop being isolated incidents. They turn into turning points. Not always because of what actually happens next, but because of what people believe might happen next. And that belief alone can change the way everything moves from here. At this point, the situation isn't just sitting in one moment anymore. It's stretching out, unfolding slowly, and pulling more attention the longer it stays unresolved. Because when something like this happens, people don't just focus on what already took place. They start watching for what comes after. And right now, everything feels like it's in that in-between stage. Not over, not escalating publicly, just waiting. That kind of silence can feel calm on the surface, but underneath it, there's always movement. Conversations happening behind the scenes. Decisions being made carefully. People choosing what to say and what not to say. And in situations like this, what you don't say can matter just as much as what you do. That's why the silence from NBA YoungBoy continues to stand out. Not because people expect him to react loudly, but because of how visible everything else has been. When one voice is completely absent while everything around it is active, it creates a different kind of focus. Some people interpret that as discipline. Others see it as distance. But in reality, it might be neither of those things. It might simply be strategy. Because the truth is, reacting publicly doesn't always help a situation. Sometimes it complicates it. Sometimes it adds layers that don't need to be there. Especially when there's still an active investigation, when details are still being sorted out, when nothing has been fully confirmed. And that's where this entire situation becomes bigger than just the people directly involved. It turns into a reflection of how things work now. Because years ago, something like this might have stayed contained longer. Information would move slower. Reactions would be limited to smaller circles. Now, everything is instant. Everything is visible. Everything becomes part of a larger conversation, whether it's meant to or not. And in that environment, there's no real separation between private emotion and public reaction. That's exactly what we saw with Boy Yunji. His live stream wasn't meant to be analyzed the way it was. It wasn't structured. It wasn't filtered. It wasn't delivered with the expectation that millions of people would break it down word for word. But that's what happens now. Every raw moment becomes content. Every emotional reaction becomes a talking point. And once it's out there, it doesn't belong to the person who said it anymore. It belongs to the audience. That shift is important to understand because it changes how situations like this evolve. It's no longer just about actions. It's about perception of actions. It's about how those actions are interpreted, repeated, and amplified. And sometimes that amplification creates pressure that didn't exist before. Because now, people aren't just reacting to what happened. They're reacting to each other's reactions. And that builds momentum. But while all of that is happening on the outside, the reality inside the situation hasn't changed. NBA Ben 10 is still dealing with the physical impact of what happened that night. Recovery doesn't happen in headlines. It doesn't trend. It happens slowly, privately, step by step. And no matter how much attention the situation gets, that part remains the most important. Because everything else, opinions, speculation, debates, all of that exists around the situation, not inside it. Inside it, it's still about survival, healing, stability, and the people closest to it understand that in a way the outside never fully will. That's why moments like this tend to divide audiences. Some people stay focused on the human side of it. Others get pulled into the narrative side, the what happens next, the theories, the predictions. Neither perspective is new, but the scale at which it happens now is. Because when millions of people are watching the same situation unfold in real time, the impact multiplies. Not just in attention, but in expectation. And expectation can be dangerous when it starts pushing situations in a direction they might not have gone otherwise. That's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The idea that constant attention can influence outcomes. That repeated narratives can shape perception. That perception can influence behavior. It's subtle, but it's real. And in situations connected to emotion, loyalty, and public visibility, that influence becomes even stronger. That's why how things move from here matters. Not just for the people directly involved, but for how the entire situation is remembered. Because eventually, there will be more clarity. There will be updates. There will be answers to questions that right now are still open. And when that happens, the narrative will shift again. It always does. But until then, everything exists in this uncertain space, where facts are limited, where emotions are high, where attention is constant. And in that space, the smallest move can feel bigger than it actually is. That's why restraint matters. That's why patience matters, even if it doesn't feel like in the moment. Because situations like this don't just test individuals. They test environments. They test how people respond under pressure, how they handle attention, how they move when everything is being watched. And right now, everything is being watched. Not just by fans, not just by media, but by people who are trying to understand what this moment represents. Is it just an isolated incident, or is it part of something larger? That question hasn't been answered yet. And until it is, the situation stays open. Not closed, not finished, just paused in a way that doesn't feel complete. But through all of that, one fact hasn't changed. NBA Ben 10 made it through that night. And in a situation where things could have gone completely differently, that matters more than anything else being discussed. Because everything else, every headline, every reaction, every theory comes after that. And none of it matters more than that. Still, the reality is this story isn't over. Not yet. There's still questions without answers. Still tension without resolution. Still a tension that hasn't moved on. And until something shifts, whether it's new information, official updates, or simply time passing, this moment stays exactly where it is. Right in the spotlight. And now I want to hear from you. Because this situation isn't just something to watch. It's something people are already forming strong opinions about, and everyone is seeing it differently. When you look at everything that's happened involving NBA Ben 10, the reaction from Boy Youngji, and the silence from NBA YoungBoy, what stands out to you the most? Do you see this as a moment of pure emotion in a high-pressure situation, or do you think there's a deeper layer to everything that's unfolding right now? Because one thing is clear, nothing about this story is being ignored. Every detail, every reaction, every silence is being watched and interpreted in real time. And as this continues to develop, the conversation around it is only going to get bigger, not smaller. So drop your thoughts in the comments. No matter what side you're on or how you interpret it, your perspective adds to the bigger picture people are trying to understand. And if you want updates as soon as anything new comes out on this situation, make sure you stay locked in and don't miss what happens next. Because this story is still moving. This is one of those moments where the next update could change everything. Stay aware. Stay tuned.